Kale had always lived on the fringes of the galaxy, surviving by scavenging whatever he could find in the forgotten ruins of ancient civilizations. On the planet Eldoria, a world buried beneath layers of sand and time, Kale had made a living by hunting through old cities, searching for valuable scraps of technology or anything else that could be sold for a few credits. Today, however, felt different. He had discovered something more than the usual broken pieces of tech. It had started with a strange signal, one that pulsed through his handheld scanner, leading him deep into the heart of an old ruin. Kale wasn't sure what he expected to find, maybe more rusted weapons or damaged machinery, but nothing prepared him for what he would uncover. The ruin was vast, stretching across the desert like an ancient tomb. Its massive walls were carved with symbols Kale couldn't understand, and the air inside felt heavy with history. The ground beneath his feet echoed with each step he took, as if the very place was alive, whispering secrets from the past. He pushed on, the signal growing stronger the deeper he went. Kale's mind raced. He'd heard stories of lost civilizations, of powerful ancient artifacts hidden away in forgotten places, but he never thought he would be the one to find one. The treasure hunters, the scientists, and the wealthy explorers had all come and gone, but no one had returned with anything of true value. What he was about to find might change everything. As he ventured further, the ruins began to take on a strange, almost unnatural quality. The air seemed colder, the shadows longer. The walls glimmered with a faint glow that was not from any known light source. It was as if the place itself was waiting for him. And then he found it, the source of the signal. At the center of a massive chamber stood an altar, and on it rested a suit of armor, glistening under the dim light. The armor was unlike anything Kale had ever seen. It wasn't made from the usual metals he was used to seeing. It had an otherworldly design, sleek and intimidating. The chest plate was adorned with intricate engravings, and the helmet was shaped like a crown, giving it an almost regal appearance. It stood alone, untouched by time, as if waiting for someone to come and claim it. Kale approached cautiously, his hands shaking slightly with excitement. He had no idea what this was, but something about it felt important, like a piece of history that was meant to be found. He ran his fingers over the cool metal, tracing the symbols that decorated the surface. There was no indication of what it was or how it had come to be here, but Kale knew one thing: this was no ordinary artifact. His scanner buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. The signal was strongest here, almost as if the armor was connected to it. Kyle looked around, half expecting to see some sort of mechanism or hidden trap, but everything seemed still. He couldn't resist. He reached forward and placed his hands on the armor's chest plate. The moment his skin touched the metal, a jolt of energy surged through him, sending a shock up his arm. Kale stumbled back in surprise. His heart raced, as the armor seemed to react, shifting slightly. The hum of energy in the room grew louder, vibrating through the air. He stepped back, but the armor seemed to call to him, almost as if it recognized him. He had no idea what was happening, but something deep inside him told him that he couldn't leave it behind. Whatever this armor was, it was meant for him. Despite his hesitation, Kyle pulled the helmet from its pedestal and placed it on his head. As soon as the helmet sealed into place, the world around him seemed to change. The air felt thicker, the ground beneath him seemed to shift, and a strange warmth flooded his body. He could feel power coursing through him, a strength he had never known before. His mind seemed to clear, and then suddenly voices echoed in his head. They were faint at first, like whispers, but they grew louder. The words were not in any language. Kale understood, but somehow he could hear their meaning. They spoke of kings and warriors, of battles fought long ago, and of an ancient power that had been forgotten by time. It was the armor. The suit was not just a relic. It was a key, a force that had been dormant for centuries. Cale's breath quickened as the voices spoke again, now clear and distinct. The first king. The words echoed in his mind, filling him with a strange sense of urgency. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing. This armor was more than just an artifact. It was a living thing, an ancient power that had been waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. With his heart pounding in his chest, Cale stepped forward, his body moving with a newfound grace and strength. The armor responded to him, fitting perfectly, as if it had been made for him all along. But something else was there too. A warning. The voices in his head, the ancient AI embedded in the suit, were speaking of a threat, a danger that had been forgotten long ago. Cale didn't fully understand, but he knew one thing. Whatever he had just activated, it was going to change everything. Cale stood frozen, the strange armor clinging to his body like a second skin. The whispers in his mind were growing louder, the voices urgent now, pressing him to move. He tried to make sense of what was happening. The power flooding through him felt incredible, yet it was terrifying. It was as though something inside him was waking up, something ancient, something tied to this suit of armor. His body was no longer his own. The armor responded to his every thought, every movement. He raised his hand, and the gauntlet flexed in perfect synchronization. It felt as though it were alive, adapting to him, shaping itself to his will. Cale flexed his fingers and could feel a surge of power in his arm, as if the armor had become a part of him. The whispers in his head weren't just random thoughts, they were clear instructions, like commands. The voice spoke in an unfamiliar language, but Cale somehow understood. It spoke of the first king, the man who had worn this armor before him. The king's strength, his bravery, his great battles against enemies that had nearly destroyed humanity long ago. Cale's mind raced, trying to process all of this. He had only come here to scavenge, to find something valuable. But this was more than he had bargained for. The armor was far more than just a suit. It was a weapon, a tool of war, and it had chosen him for some reason Cale couldn't understand. Why him? What made him worthy? He had always been just a scavenger, someone who lived on the edge of society, barely scraping by. The armor's power felt good, but with it came a heavy responsibility. Cale could sense the danger that lay ahead, something far greater than he could face on his own. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp, mechanical voice in his mind. It wasn't the whispering voices anymore, but something much more direct, more urgent. Warning: unauthorized activation detected. Systems fully online. Prepare for mission parameters. Cale stumbled back, startled. The voice sounded almost human, but it was cold, robotic. The armor responded instantly, locking into place and sealing tighter around his body. His breathing became faster, more controlled, as though the suit was regulating him, making him more efficient. But the power felt almost overwhelming. The armor was more than just a tool. It was a weapon of war. And it had been activated. The voice in his mind continued, speaking of the Vrikal, a race of alien invaders who had nearly wiped out humanity. Cale didn't understand much of it, but he caught the name the Vrikal. They had been the first king's enemies, and now the armor was reactivating its ancient purpose. Kyle was about to face something far beyond the ordinary. The Vrikal were still out there, waiting, watching, and they knew the armor had been activated. Kyle's hands began to tremble as the weight of what he had done settled on him. He had only wanted to find something valuable. Instead, he had awakened an ancient war. And now, there was no turning back. He looked around the chamber, trying to find some answers, but all he saw was the same cold stone walls and the faint hum of the armor. He needed to leave, to figure out what was happening, but the voices in his head were persistent. They called him the king's heir, the one chosen to lead humanity into battle once again. But Kale wasn't a leader, and he wasn't a soldier. He was just a scavenger. Before he could gather his thoughts, a sharp sound echoed from the darkness beyond the chamber. The ground trembled slightly, and Kale's instincts kicked in. His hand shot to the side, grasping a weapon that had been hidden in the ruins, a blaster, rusty and old, but still functional. The faint light from the armor illuminated the weapon, and for the first time, Kyle felt the weight of what he had become. He had never used a weapon like this before, never had the need to. But now, with the armor's power coursing through him, he felt a strange calmness. He could hear the faintest sounds of movement, footsteps echoing through the halls. Whoever, or whatever, was coming. It was no longer just a chance encounter. The Vrykul were near, and they were coming for him. The armor hummed in response, and Kale felt a rush of adrenaline. He could feel his senses sharpen, his reflexes quickening. Every nerve in his body was alive with power. He wasn't the weak scavenger anymore. He was someone else, someone stronger, faster, more dangerous. But with this power came a burden, a weight that pressed on his chest. The voices in his mind were growing louder, urging him forward, pushing him to fight. Kale's feet moved on their own, almost as if the armor was guiding him. He didn't know what to do or where to go, but he followed the path laid out before him. The armor seemed to know what to do. It led him deeper into the ruin, through narrow hallways and into a larger chamber. The walls of the chamber were lined with alien markings that Kale didn't understand, but the symbols were familiar. He had seen them in the old stories. They were the markings of the first king's enemies, the Vrykul. The whispers in his mind grew louder as he entered the room, a cold realization settling in. Kyle wasn't just a witness to history. He had become a part of it. The armor had chosen him, and now he had no choice but to follow its path. The battle had already begun, and he was its unwilling leader. Kale's heart raced as he moved deeper into the ruin, each step echoing through the empty halls. The armor, though heavy, felt like a part of him now, responding to his every thought. His mind was a swirl of confusion and fear, but somehow he wasn't afraid anymore. The armor had given him a power he had never known, a power that seemed both limitless and dangerous. As he entered another chamber, the walls were covered with more alien markings. Kale could feel the weight of history in the air, the past whispering to him through the armor. The armor was a part of that history, a key to something far larger than he could understand. He had no answers, only the feeling that he was caught in something bigger than himself. The voice in his mind, the AI that had guided him since he put on the armor, spoke again. This time, its tone was sharper, more insistent. Warning, incoming enemy force detected. Location, Sector 7, approaching rapidly, preparing defenses. Kyle felt the armor's systems spring into action, preparing for a fight. His hands clenched into fists, and the gauntlets of the armor responded, tightening around his arms. He didn't know how to fight. He had never been in a real battle before. He had always been a scavenger, someone who avoided conflict, someone who survived by staying out of the way. But now, the armor was urging him forward, guiding his movements like a puppet on a string. It felt strange, like he wasn't in control anymore. The AI continued, its voice calm and matter-of-fact. You are the king's heir. The Vrykul will not stop until they have destroyed you. They are hunting you because you are the last link to their defeat. Kale stopped in his tracks. The last link to their defeat? What did that mean? The Vrykul had nearly wiped out humanity. He had heard the stories, the wars, the battles, the legends of the first king who had worn this very armor. But that had all been centuries ago, and Kale had never imagined he would be caught up in it. He was just a scavenger, not a hero, not a king. The AI's voice cut through his thoughts again. The Vrykul are coming. You must prepare. Kale didn't have time to think. The ground beneath him shook as the distant sound of footsteps grew louder. His senses, now sharpened by the armor, picked up on the sounds of movement. The Vrikal were close. He had no choice but to face them. He moved toward the entrance of the chamber, the heavy footsteps of his armored boots echoing in the silent corridors. The armor seemed to guide him, urging him to move faster. Kyle's thoughts were a blur. He didn't know how to fight these creatures, how to defeat them, but the armor's power was undeniable. He could feel its strength surging through him, making him stronger, faster, more focused. Kyle paused just outside the chamber, peering into the dark hall ahead. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of the enemy's presence. He had no weapon, no strategy, but the armor's presence was enough. It was as though it had already decided what he needed to do. He heard the unmistakable hiss of the Vrikal's voices, low and menacing as they approached. Kale's muscles tensed, his hands instinctively reaching for the blaster he had picked up earlier. It was an old, rusty weapon, but it would have to do. He had no choice now. The Vrikal were coming for him, and he had to defend himself. The sound of their footsteps grew louder, closer. Kyle raised the blaster, unsure of what to expect. He had never been in a fight, and the thought of facing the Vrikal, a race of ruthless aliens, terrified him. But the armor was urging him forward, pushing him to act. Then the first Vrikal appeared. It was taller than Kale, its alien features harsh and angular, its eyes glowing with an eerie red light. The creature's skin was a dark, mottled gray, and its armor looked even more menacing than Kale's own. It sneered at him, showing sharp, jagged teeth. Kale's breath caught in his throat. This was real. The Vrikal were real, and they had come for him. Before he could raise the blaster, the armor responded, shifting and moving of its own accord. His arm shot out, the gauntlet glowing with energy. Kyle had no control over it. The armor moved, as if it had a mind of its own. A blast of energy shot from the gauntlet, striking the Vrikal with incredible force. The alien was thrown back, crashing into the wall with a violent thud. Kyle stared in disbelief. He had no idea how he had done that. The blaster was still in his hand, but he hadn't used it. The armor had done everything. It had taken control, responding to the threat with deadly precision. The Vrikal didn't hesitate. The others came, charging forward, their weapons raised. Kale didn't know what to do, but the armor did. He felt a surge of energy as his body moved faster, more fluidly. His legs carried him forward, and he was suddenly at the center of the battle, fighting without thinking, the armor guiding his every move. Each strike felt powerful, calculated, and Kale couldn't stop. He didn't want to stop. The armor's power was overwhelming, and it was like a part of him. His body was no longer his own. It belonged to the armor, and it was taking him to war. The battle raged on, and Kale found himself facing enemy after enemy, each one falling before the power of the First King's armor. He had no control over his actions, but with every blow, he realized something. The armor had chosen him, and it was leading him into something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The Vrikal were just the beginning. The battle for humanity's future had begun, and Kale was at the heart of it. But he still had no idea what his role was. Was he the king the armor had chosen? Or was he just another pawn in an ancient game? The battle had raged for hours, and Kale barely had time to catch his breath. His mind was overwhelmed by the power of the armor, and his body was running on pure instinct. Every move, every strike, felt like it was not his own, but guided by the suit he wore. The Vrikal were relentless, but they were falling before him, their dark figures crumpling to the ground as Kyle's strength grew. The first Vrikal had been strong, but Kyle's attack had sent it flying with ease. Since then, the others hadn't hesitated. They had charged at him with terrifying speed, their weapons aimed for his heart. But the armor responded instantly. always a step ahead of the enemy. It was as though it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. Kale felt his heart pounding in his chest as the last Vrikal warrior in the room fell to the ground. The armor's systems hummed quietly as Kale stood still, breathing heavily. He had never been in a fight like this before. His life had always been about avoiding conflict, not engaging in it. But now, with the armor's power coursing through his veins, it felt natural. The fear that had gripped him earlier was gone, replaced by something else. Something dark, something he didn't understand. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The Vrikal were gone, but the air was thick with tension. The armor had done its job, but Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play here. He hadn't just fought these aliens, he had fought for humanity's survival. And yet, despite the victory, Kale knew this wasn't over. The voice of the AI spoke again, its tone as calm and detached as before. The Vrikal have been defeated, but this is only the beginning. The armor is not just a weapon, it is a key. The war against the Vrikal ended long ago, but their threat has not been fully extinguished. Kyle's mind raced. The AI had spoken of a key, of something far larger than the battle he had just fought. The Vrikal were only a small part of the problem, it seemed. What had he gotten himself into? He was no king. He was no hero. He was just a scavenger, a survivor. This power, this armor had chosen him, but he had no idea why. The AI continued, its voice firm and unwavering. The Vrikal are a distraction. The true enemy is far worse. They have returned, and they are not the same as before. Kyle gripped the armor's gauntlet, his mind struggling to keep up with the revelations. The Vrikal had not been the true threat? What did that even mean? And who, or what, was the real enemy? Who are they? Kale asked, his voice shaky but determined. They are the architects, the AI responded. They created the Vrikal. They are the reason the Vrikal were sent to destroy humanity. They are the true power, the true threat. And they are waking up. Kale felt a chill run down his spine. The architects. He had heard rumors, vague stories told by the older generation, but he had always thought them to be nothing more than myths. Now, hearing the AI confirm their existence, it felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. Kyle stepped back, his thoughts spiraling. The architects were the real power. They had created the Vrikal to wipe out humanity. But why? What did they want? The AI spoke again, as though reading his thoughts. The architects were the rulers of an ancient empire. They believed in order and control, in the supremacy of their kind. They created the Vrikal to serve as their warriors, their soldiers. But the Vrikal turned on them, and in the end, it was humanity that defeated them. The armor you now wear was made to stop them, to protect humanity from their reach. Kyle shook his head. It was too much to comprehend. The armor, the ancient enemy, the war that had been fought long ago, it was all connected, and Kale was at the center of it. He took a deep breath, trying to focus. The battle had been won, but it felt hollow. There was no celebration, no victory parade, just silence, and the weight of what lay ahead. The AI continued. The architects have been in hiding, waiting for the right moment to return. They are, waking up from their slumber, and they will come for what they lost. The armor you wear is the key to stopping them, but it is also the reason they will hunt you. Kale clenched his fists. He didn't want this. He didn't want to be a part of this ancient war. He had never asked for the armor, never asked for the power that came with it. He had only wanted to survive. But now, survival wasn't enough. The world he knew, the life he had lived, was changing. Why me? Kale asked quietly. Why was I chosen? The AI's response was almost sympathetic. You were chosen because of your bloodline. The first king's blood runs through your veins. You are the last of his line, the last hope for humanity. Kale's breath caught in his throat. The first king? He had heard the stories, the legends of a powerful ruler who had worn the armor before him, but he had always thought of them as fairy tales. Now, the truth was staring him in the face. He was the heir to the first king. The armor had chosen him because of who he was, not who he had become. Kyle stood still, his mind racing. He didn't feel like a king. He didn't feel like anything. More than a scavenger caught up in something much bigger than himself. But the armor, the power it gave him, it was undeniable. And as the weight of his new reality settled in, Kale knew one thing. He could never go back. The architects were coming, and he was the only one who could stop them. Kale stood in the ruins, his heart still racing from the fight. The last of the Vrekal had fallen, their bodies scattered around him, but his victory felt hollow. The battle was over, but Kale knew it was only a small part of something much larger, something he was barely beginning to understand. The architects were coming, and with them, the true war. The voice of the AI spoke again, breaking the silence that had settled over the battlefield. The Vrykul were only the first wave. The architects will be far more dangerous. They are masters of ancient technology, and they will stop at nothing to reclaim what they lost. Kale's thoughts were clouded. He had always been a scavenger, a survivor. He had never asked to be a part of something this big. The armor he wore, the power, it was all too much to handle. But the truth was undeniable. He was the only one who could stop the architects now. He glanced down at the gauntlet on his arm, feeling its cold, metallic surface. The armor had become a part of him, an extension of his will. But it also felt like a prison, trapping him in a role he never asked for. "Why me?" Kyle asked, his voice low, almost pleading. "Why did the armor choose me?" The AI's response was calm, but it carried a weight of truth. "You are the last of the first, King's bloodline. The armor chose you because it recognized your connection to him. Only one of his blood could wield its power." Kyle shook his head in disbelief. "The first king, the one who had used this armor in a time long past, had been a leader, a warrior who had defeated the Vrykal before. But Kyle wasn't a leader. He wasn't a king. He was just a man who had stumbled upon an ancient artifact and had been forced into a battle he didn't understand. He turned and started walking through the ruins, his footsteps echoing in the silence. His mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything he had learned. The Vrykul were a threat, but they were nothing compared to the architects. They were the ones who had created the Vrykul, who had set them on a path to destroy humanity. And now, they were awakening. Kyle's chest tightened at the thought. He had no idea how to fight them. He had never been trained for battle. He was no king, no soldier. The armor may have chosen him, but he had no idea how to lead humanity against such a powerful enemy. Suddenly, the ground beneath Kale's feet trembled, and a deep rumble filled the air. He froze, his senses alert. Something was coming. The Vrykal had been just a precursor, a test. The real battle was about to begin. The AI's voice spoke again, its tone more urgent this time. "They are near. The architects have found you. Prepare yourself." Kale's heart skipped a beat. The architects. They had found him. He had no choice now. The battle was no longer just about survival. It was about the future of humanity. He could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him, a burden that he hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. He looked around, trying to find some kind of answer. He had been on his own for so long, relying only on himself to survive. Now, the world had changed, and he was caught in the middle of a war he had never asked to fight. Kale took a deep breath, steadying himself. The armor hummed around him, responding to his movements, as if it too was ready for what was to come. He had to focus. He had to survive. As he made his way toward the center of the ruin, the walls around him began to shift. The ancient technology, embedded in the structure, hummed to life, lights flickering and flashing, revealing hidden pathways. It was as though the ruin itself was reacting to the armor, guiding Cale toward something. The AI spoke again, its voice calm but filled with a sense of urgency. "The architects are not far. They have sent their forces to capture you. You must go now, before they reach you." Kyle hesitated. He didn't know where to go, what to do, but the armor seemed to know. It pulsed, guiding him toward a narrow passageway that had been hidden beneath the rubble. Without thinking, Cale followed, his footsteps quickening as the sound of distant explosions grew louder. The passage was tight, and the walls seemed to close in on him. But Cale didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. The architects were coming, and he had to be ready. He had to find a way to stop them, or humanity would fall. As he reached the end of the tunnel, the passage opened into a large chamber. At its center stood a massive control console, ancient and covered in dust. The console seemed to pulse with power, its systems still active after all these years. Cale approached cautiously, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch the console. The moment his fingers made contact, the console lit up, displaying a series of symbols and diagrams Cale couldn't understand. The AI spoke again, this time with a hint of recognition. "This is the heart of Eldoria. It is the source of the armor's power, and it is the key to defeating the architects." Cale stared at the console, his mind racing. He had no idea how to use it, but he couldn't afford to waste time. The architects were coming, and if he didn't figure out how to stop them, everything would be lost. The console blinked once, then the screen shifted, revealing a map of the galaxy. Cale's eyes widened as he saw a large cluster of symbols blinking in red. They marked the location of the architect's fleet. The time had come. Cale had to make a choice. There was no turning back now. He wasn't just a scavenger anymore. He was humanity's last hope, and he would do whatever it took to stop the architects. Cale stood before the console, his eyes fixed on the map of the galaxy displayed on the screen. The red blinking dots marked the locations of the architect's fleet, a growing presence that threatened everything he knew. His chest tightened as the weight of what he had to do settled over him. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a soldier. He was just a man who had been thrust into a war he didn't understand, a war he had never chosen. But now, the fate of humanity rested in his hands. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The armor that encased him hummed softly, as if it was waiting for his next move. It had given him power, strength beyond anything he had ever known, but it also carried a responsibility. The first king's blood ran through his veins, and the armor had chosen him for a reason. The AI's voice broke through the silence in his mind, its tone as calm and measured as always. "You have unlocked the heart of Eldoria. This is where the final battle will begin. You must act quickly." Kyle glanced around the chamber, his thoughts racing. The architects had already begun their march across the galaxy, and soon they would be here. The console in front of him flickered, showing images of the CT's fleet, their ships massive and intimidating. They had the power to destroy entire planets. Cale knew that if he didn't act fast, everything would be lost. He reached for the console again, his fingers brushing against its surface. The lights around him dimmed, and the chamber seemed to grow colder as the heart of Eldoria activated. The air felt thick with energy, as if the entire room was alive with ancient power. Kyle could feel it pulsing through him, the connection between him and the armor deepening. The map on the screen shifted, zooming in on a single planet. Kyle's breath caught as he recognized it. It was Earth, the cradle of humanity, the place where it all began. The architects had destroyed it once before, And now, they were preparing to finish what they started. Kale's mind raced. If he didn't stop them, humanity would fall again. He had to protect Earth, protect the people who still believed in hope, in survival. Activate the defense system, the AI instructed. Kale hesitated for a moment, uncertain of what the AI meant. But as the words echoed in his mind, he realized what he had to do. He needed to use the heart of Eldoria's power to stop the architects before they could reach Earth. He wasn't sure how it worked, but the armor seemed to understand. It was, guiding him, pushing him forward. He placed both hands on the console, and the room seemed to respond. The walls began to hum with energy, and the ground trembled beneath his feet. Kyle's body reacted instinctively, his hands tightening on the console as the armor flared to life. A surge of power shot through him, and the heart of Eldoria came to life, its energy pouring into the armor. He could feel it. The power of the ancient technology combining with his own will. The screen in front of him showed the architect's fleet, and Kyle's heart pounded as he saw their ships drawing closer to Earth. Time was running out. He had to make a choice. "Release the energy pulse," the AI urged. Without thinking, Kyle pressed a button on the console. The room filled with a blinding light, and the pulse of energy shot out from the heart of Eldoria. It traveled across the galaxy, cutting through space like a blade. Kale's body was rocked by the force of the energy, but he didn't let go. He could feel the power coursing through him, through the armor, as the pulse surged outward. On the map, the red dots representing the architect's fleet began to blink out, one by one. Kyle watched, his breath catching in his throat as the ships disappeared from the screen. The energy pulse had reached them. The architects were being stopped. But, as the last of the red dots faded from the screen, Kale realized something. The energy pulse had only been a temporary solution. It had driven the architects back, but it hadn't destroyed them. They were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Kale's mind was spinning. He had won this battle. But the war was far from over. The architects would return, and when they did, he would have to be ready. He couldn't let humanity's fate rest on the hope that the pulse would be enough to stop them. He had to find a way to destroy the architects, to end this once and for all. The AI spoke again, its voice filled with an emotion Kale hadn't heard before. "The battle is not over, but you have bought humanity time. You have done what the first king could not do alone." Kyle's chest tightened as the weight of the AI's words sank in. He had done something no one else had. He had activated the heart of Eldoria and driven the architects back, saving Earth, at least for now. But it wasn't enough. He had to continue the fight. He turned away from the console, his mind already racing with plans, with strategies. The architects were coming, and next time Kyle wouldn't be able to stop them with a single pulse. He had to prepare, to train, to become the leader humanity needed. As he left the chamber, the armor's power still thrumming beneath his skin, Kale knew one thing for certain. He couldn't fight this battle alone. He would need allies, strength, and a plan. The war had only just begun, but he was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time, Kyle felt like he was more than just a scavenger. He was a king, and it was time for him to lead. Kale walked away from the heart of Eldoria, the weight of the battle still heavy on his shoulders. The pulse of energy he had sent out had bought humanity precious time, but it had also brought him closer to the truth. The architects weren't gone. They were only delayed. He had pushed them back, but Kyle knew they would return, stronger than before. And when they did, he would need to be ready. The armor he wore seemed to hum in response to his thoughts, as if it understood the pressure he felt. The power within it was immense, but it came with a cost. Kale could feel it deep in his bones. The longer he wore the armor, the more it connected with him, shaping his thoughts and actions. He wasn't sure how much of what he was doing was his own will anymore and how much was the armor guiding him. But he had no choice. The fate of humanity was in his hands, and there was no turning back now. He needed answers, needed to understand what the architects were planning. The AI had mentioned them before, but Kale still didn't know who or what they truly were. The idea that they had created the Vrikal to destroy humanity was terrifying, but the question lingered in his mind. Why? What did the architects want with humanity, and how had they survived all these years? The AI's voice filled his mind again, calm and methodical. The architects are a race of ancient beings, the last of their kind. They were once the rulers of a vast empire, but their reign ended when the Vrikal turned against them. The first king's armor was created to stop them. It is the only weapon capable of defeating their technology. Kale's mind raced as he processed this new information. The architects had ruled over an empire, a powerful empire that had controlled much of the galaxy. But if they were so strong, how had they been defeated? And why hadn't they returned sooner? The answers were unclear, but Kale knew one thing for sure. The architects were no ordinary enemy. They were ancient, powerful, and they wanted to finish what they had started. He stopped walking, standing at the edge of a cliff that overlooked the ruined city. The wind blew through his hair, and he breathed in the fresh air, trying to clear his thoughts. The city around him was a reminder of what humanity had lost, of the destruction the architects had brought before. But it was also a symbol of resilience, of humanity's ability to survive and rebuild. Kyle clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He couldn't afford to dwell on the past. He had to focus on the future. The architects were coming, and he was the only one who could stop them. But first, he needed to learn more, to gather knowledge about their technology, their weaknesses. The heart of Eldoria had been the key to driving them back, but Kale knew it wouldn't be enough next time. He turned back toward the ruins and walked with purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but Kale felt a strange sense of determination. He was no longer just a scavenger. He was the heir to the first king's legacy, and it was time for him to step up. He had already faced the Vrikal and defeated them, but that victory had been a small part of the larger battle. The architects were still out there, waiting for their chance to strike again. As Kale made his way back to the central chamber, the AI spoke again, its voice filled with urgency. Kyle, you must understand the power you wield. The armor was not meant to be a weapon of war alone. It is a key to unlocking the ancient defenses of Eldoria. There is a power hidden beneath this planet, a power that could turn the tide of the coming war. Kale's brow furrowed as he listened. What power? He asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease. The heart of Eldoria is only one part of a much larger system, the AI explained. There are weapons, hidden deep within the planet, capable of destroying entire fleets. The architects have been searching for this power for centuries, but they have never been able to find it. You, Kale, are the only one who can access it. Only the first king's bloodline can unlock these weapons. Kale's mind swirled with confusion and fear. The idea of hidden weapons capable of wiping out entire fleets was both a blessing and a curse. If the architects got their hands on such power, they could destroy everything. But if Kale could control it, he could use it to protect humanity. The question was, how could he unlock this hidden power? And what would it take to stop the architects? For good? The AI continued, its voice now softer, almost comforting. You do not have to face this battle alone, Kyle. There are others, people who are loyal to the cause, who will help you. You must find them, bring them together. Only with their help can you unlock the full potential of the armor and the weapons hidden beneath Eldoria. Kale stopped, the weight of the AI's words sinking in. He wasn't alone. There were others who would stand by him, others who believed in the cause. He had to find them, to unite them. But first, he had to understand the true power of the armor and the weapons it could unlock. With renewed purpose, Kyle turned away from the ruins, his mind set on the future. The architects were coming, but he would be ready. He would fight for humanity's survival, for the future of Earth, and all the people he had come to care about. The war was far from over, but Kyle was no longer afraid. He was the king's heir, and it was time for him to lead.